Well, here we are again with another of the series of Kinescope TV shows featuring Bob Perrin and presented by our local Boy Scout Council. We Scouters are presenting this series to the adults of this community in order to point up certain values, the spiritual, the mental, the moral values inherent in the Boy Scout program. Now, we've been able to accomplish this task through the efforts of public-minded citizens in this community who give of their time freely. Incidentally, these people are not professionals. This series being about scouting, what could be more apropos than that a fellow like Bob Perrin would be here to take over. Bob is especially well suited for this particular material because, well, he's had a great experience in the outdoors. He has 4 sons of his own and has a deep-seated interest in boys and their development. Bob realizes that a knowledge of first aid is one of the most important things that a scout can have. In fact, we should all have it. Because simply sometimes the ignorance about a minor injury can very often lead to a serious illness. Now, it's natural for a boy to want to pass up some minor little thing. It's true. It's only the natural, healthy boys like that. But still in all, it mustn't be carried to the point of foolhardiness, and therefore he must be made aware of first aid. Now, we hope you'll never have to have the knowledge of first aid, but the most important thing is that if ever a time comes when you need it, that no time will be lost in applying it as it should be applied. So that, remember, very often, a second can mean a life. Okay, Bob, take over.
First aid. It's such a simple thing in some ways, and yet sometimes we try to make it such a complicated and difficult affair. In scouting, it's a big part of the boy's training, and it starts early in the game in the cub work when, as a wolf or bear or lion cub, he finds in the cub book the things that he has to do to fix a simple cut on his finger. Now, that simple business of fixing a cut on your finger is a very wonderful way to start the first aid progress of a boy in scouting, or in fact in any method that he may use to learn the basic elements. Because, you know, the simple things that happen to a youngster are the things which really need first aid. Let's put a cut on our finger here, our thumb rather, with the magic wax. It's a very simple process. The magic wax really isn't magic. It's just a first aid gimmick which uses the makeup wax that they use in all dramatic shows and in the movies to make up people with for various scenes and actions. We're going to put a little bit of it on the top of our thumb here, and then we're going to take a rather common accident that happens to every boy that ever played on the outside or built a tree house in any way, and put a splinter in that. Now, in scouting, we like to do things rather than just talk about it. And so we use this makeup wax and the first aid equipment we have here for the purpose of showing a boy how rather than telling him how. Now we're going to take a little blood. Blood, of course, he's very much interested in. It's made simply out of cake coloring, just the red cake coloring that you put on cakes, icing, and cocoa. You mix a little cake coloring, red cake coloring, and some cocoa, and you have a very lifelike and real-looking blood. Well, we got a splinter in our thumb, and there's a couple things we can do about it. We can rush home to Mother and tell her about it, or we can sit around and hurt real bad, or we can take some positive, definite scouting-like steps. The first thing I think we ought to tell a boy about a splinter of this kind is, and it's a common thing, is to pull it out. What if he even breaks it off in there? Somebody's got to take the rest of it out anyway, and there's less chance of moving the splinter and catching it on something and tearing a worse injury in the hand than is now present. And so even though it happens that he breaks it off in pulling it out, at least the pulling it out gives him some satisfaction of trying to help himself. Well, we're going to pull this one out. And it leaves quite a hole. Something has to be done about that hole. You know, the simple thing about first aid is that we want to have the boy learn to cover up the wound into simple things and then tell somebody about it. So many times first aid to a boy is made very difficult. And I've even heard some classes in first aid where the instructor had a very difficult problem for the boys. You know, a fellow was hanging over a cliff on a limb, about 10 feet from the edge down, and it was 1,000 feet to the bottom, and he had a broken arm and a broken leg and a skull fracture, and his ribs were broken and a bad cut on his foot, and he needed artificial respiration. What do you do for him? Well, of course, the little fellow in the back of the room that pipes up and says, well, shoot him, is pretty near right. The truth is a boy very seldom ever gets to that kind of a problem. In a serious traffic accident, the grown-ups take care of it, and they sort of shove the boy out of the way. So we're going to teach him first to do the simple things on himself. Now the Band-Aid, we have to be careful of it. We don't want to get this part of it dirty where the sterile gauze is, but we don't have to handle it so carefully that we're liable to drop it or learn some trick, fancy way of putting it on. We just pick it up and try to keep it as clean as possible, and we're going to cover this wound that we have. And next, we're going to do the basic scouting thing, and that is to tell somebody about it, to tell them that we've got a splinter in. More youngsters have been seriously hurt because they did not tell anyone about an injury and it became infected than have ever been hurt by the mere splinter or the little blister or the small cut they had on their hand. So that it is important that he learn that first he takes care of the wound by covering it, the simple thing, and then he tells somebody, well, that's a splinter. Let's take a look at a common injury that happens to all scouts who are boys and to all boys who are not scouts even, and that's a simple cut. Again, we'll put our cuts away now and our splinters away and take the next step in first aid, because it's logical to believe that with cuts there's always bleeding. Now bleeding can be a very serious thing, and taking care of bleeding is a very simple thing also, if we know how to do it properly. It's important that in the bleeding that we learn first the simplest method of stopping it, and that is with so-called digital pressure. Now, digital pressure is the pressure which you apply with your fingers. You know, when I was a boy, I learned a lot about digital pressure, and I found out that the simplest thing to do was that you took a finger and you placed it on these points, which I learned by heart. Oh, let's see, there was the maxillary, the subclavian, the carotid, the femoral, and several others, and I got so good at it, you know, that I could sit up there and name all of those pressure points and do it by heart right straight through without missing a one. In fact, I was so good that if a person had been cut real bad, I could have stood right over the top of them and told you every one of the pressure points. But I don't know that I could have done much about it to actually apply them. Look at this simple pressure point for a cut on the thumb. You don't need to know any special name for it. If your thumb is cut or has a splinter on the end of it at the joint and you pull it out and it bleeds quite a bit, all you have to do is grasp your thumb at the bottom and squeeze hard at the bottom of the thumb. And when you do that, you have a pressure point, even though you have no particular name and you don't know for sure what you're going to do with it. As far as what artery goes down there and what vein goes down there, you just squeeze it hard. Well, the next place that people cut themselves most is on the hands or on the fingers. And it bleeds pretty badly. And this is one way. There are many ways of stopping bleeding. This is one way to do it when you have a cut on your finger or on your hand. Let's make a duck. We're going to make a duck with this hand, of course the hand that's not cut. And we're going to grab our arm between the elbow and the shoulder, in the middle, hard. We're just going to grab it hard. And then when we got a hold of it, we're going to twist it toward the floor. Now, when you twist it toward the floor, you roll that big artery that goes down the inside of your arm against the bone, and you stop the blood. But you know something? The blood just won't shut off like a faucet, because all the blood from my hand here down to the tips of my fingers that's in the capillaries and the veins and the small arteries has to run out. It has to run down and out, and so when I put this pressure on, it won't quit bleeding instantly. We must make clear to a boy that that's so. If we don't, then he's liable to be afraid that he hasn't got it on right and release it and try it again. Now, to make it simpler, there is a good rule that all scouts know that are first-class scouts and second-class first aid work, that when you're injured, no matter how slight it is, it's always well to get down, to sit down on the ground or on the floor. So let's get down first. The first thing we're going to do is to get down. Now, I can't tell him to lean against a tree because there are many parts of the country where there's no tree to lean against. But he can get down, and then if he gets faint or sick at his stomach from shock, he won't fall over and hurt himself more. Well, we're going to make a duck, grab our arm. This is a simple bell jar, and it has in it a tube and some balloons, and on the bottom of it, a inner tube which represents the diaphragm. Now, when this diaphragm goes down, comes up, the lungs are emptied. When it goes down, there's more space, and the outside air rushes in. When it goes up, they're emptied. And as you watch, as the diaphragm works, you can see the lungs collapsing and filling full of air, so that we have a perfect model of exactly the way our breathing is. Nothing touches the lungs, nothing can reach them because the rib cage is in the way, and we work it by the simple process of change of pressure. That, incidentally, is what makes it harder to breathe on the top of a mountain. And with the cooperation of the American Red Cross and the Armed Services and the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts and the YMCA and the YWCA, all of the agencies interested in life-saving, a group got together and scientifically worked out a method which is accepted by all. And I have a film here made by the National Boy Scout Health and Safety Division concerning this new method, and in seeing it, you will learn how to do it. And I'd like to show you that film. Let's take a look at it. This artificial respiration here is the so-called new back pressure arm lift. And it's named simply because it's what you do. It's back pressure and arm lift. The patient is pulled out of the water or out of a room with gas or smoke, and you start to work immediately. That's very important. Then you place him on his stomach, hands on his face, face on his hands, and very simply start your pressure on a line drawn below the shoulder blades, placing the palm of your hands on that line. Now the pressure is simply swing forward until your arms are straight, Slide your hands down his arms to the elbows and raise the elbows until resistance is met. The piece of tape you see there on the picture was the place for you to place the palm of your hands. You do this about 12 times a minute, and in so doing you will accommodate his natural rhythm of breathing. Now it's simply back pressure, arm lift, release, back pressure, arm lift, back pressure, arm lift, release, back pressure, arm lift, release. And if you will say what you are doing instead of counting, you know when you're excited you count too fast. You say 101, 102, 103, 104. You will find that it will help you a great deal to hit the right amount of time. Good scouting to you, and happy trails. And come visit with us again sometime.